Well, this is certainly a big update in the legal drama playing out between actors Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. The judge has dismissed one of the complaints and laid out his reasoning in an order that is more than 100 pages long. We dug through the paperwork to bring you the very latest.
The courtroom was gripped with a rare, almost cinematic stillness as Judge Louis J. Liman, presiding over one of the most high-profile cases to hit the Southern District of New York in recent memory, delivered his ruling. The gavel fell with a finality that echoed louder than any closing argument. Before him sat attorneys representing some of the most recognizable names in entertainment: Blake Lively, Reynolds, representatives from the New York Times, and the embattled plaintiff, Justin Baldoni, along with his production company, Wayfarer Studios. What began as a lawsuit seeking $400 million in damages ended with a blistering 132-page opinion that tore apart Baldoni's case line by line. Judge Liman's decision wasn't just a legal defeat. It was a surgical dismantling of an entire narrative.
Justin Baldoni's legal battle with Blake Lively just took a new turn. On June 9th, a federal judge dismissed his $400 million countersuit against his It Ends With Us co-star and her husband, Reynolds, Access Hollywood confirms.
In painstaking detail, he deconstructed each claim, exposing gaping holes in logic, unsupported accusations, and an alarming absence of concrete evidence. Baldoni had alleged a massive conspiracy, accusing Lively of orchestrating a behind-the-scenes campaign to sabotage both his reputation and the release of their shared film project, It Ends With Us. He claimed that Lively and Reynolds coordinated defamatory leaks to the media, manipulated press cycles, and weaponized their influence to pressure agencies and distributors into abandoning him. But Judge Liman didn't just find the allegations weak, he found them legally hollow. The opinion methodically explained how each claim collapsed under scrutiny, citing precedent after precedent to show how the law simply did not support Baldoni's theory of the case. The judge didn't rely on hyperbole or emotion. Instead, his ruling was grounded in the cold precision of federal legal standards, making it all the more devastating.
Baldoni and his production company, Wayfarer Studios, sued Lively and Reynolds for defamation in January and sought at least $400 million in damages.
Perhaps most damning was Liman's refusal to let the case live on through amendments. Normally, plaintiffs who file flawed complaints are given the opportunity to revise and resubmit, especially in complex, high-dollar civil litigation. But not this time. Liman ruled that allowing Baldoni to amend the complaint would be futile, a legal term that carries a particularly sharp edge in this context. It meant the flaws were not technical or procedural, but foundational. There was no legal scaffolding left to build upon. The court found that Wayfarer Studios, despite having access to the best legal minds and months to prepare, had failed to identify any enforceable agreements, any specific unlawful conduct, or any damages that could survive the scrutiny of federal litigation. In plain terms, there was nothing there.
According to documents obtained by Access, the judge also dismissed the director's libel lawsuit against the New York Times, in which he accuses the paper of working with Lively to smear him.
What made the ruling extraordinary wasn't just its scale or the celebrity names attached to it. It was how decisively it closed the door. For Baldoni, who had positioned the lawsuit as both a legal battle and a public vindication, this ruling wasn't just a loss in court, it was an erasure. Most of his allegations wouldn't be allowed a second chance. The narrative he had tried to cast, of a man wronged by powerful Hollywood elites, betrayed by his colleagues, and dragged through a media firestorm, was now legally rendered as unfounded. In a single document, Judge Liman didn't just dismiss a lawsuit. He declared that the story behind it never had legal standing to begin with. At the center of the legal firestorm was the ill-fated production of It Ends With Us, a film that, on paper, had all the ingredients of a Hollywood success story. Best-selling source material, a high-profile cast, and a buzzy pre-release following. Justin Baldoni, who secured the rights to adapt Colleen Hoover's novel, took on the dual role of director and co-star. Blake Lively, cast in the lead, was not only the face of the film, but also wielded significant influence behind the scenes.
The filing also states that Judge Louis J. Liman did note that Baldoni's legal team can amend the allegations relevant to the claims of interference with contract and breach of implied covenant by June 23rd.
As production progressed, what should have been a smooth collaboration between creatives spiraled into a bitter and deeply personal conflict. Lively formally filed a complaint through her legal representatives alleging a hostile work environment. According to documents submitted to the court, she cited repeated incidents of erratic and unprofessional behavior on set, including abrupt script changes without consultation, dismissive treatment of cast and crew, and actions she described as manipulative and retaliatory when she raised concerns. Baldoni didn't just deny the accusations, he launched a counteroffensive. In his court filings, he accused Lively of fabricating the allegations as part of a calculated power play. He claimed she had attempted to wrest creative control of the project away from him and had conspired to reshape the film in her image, sidelining his vision entirely. More than that, he alleged that once she had enough leverage, through studio backing and media favor, she initiated a whisper campaign that portrayed him as toxic and untrustworthy. Baldoni's lawsuit went further, dragging Reynolds into the fray. He alleged that Reynolds used his Hollywood clout and connections to quietly circulate damaging narratives, influencing public perception and effectively blacklisting Baldoni within the industry. But when the matter landed before the court, those explosive claims began to collapse under the weight of legal scrutiny. Judge Liman's written opinion did not mince words.
Following the decision, Blake spoke out, writing on her Instagram story, quote, "Last week, I stood proudly alongside 19 organizations uniting in defending women's rights to speak up for their safety. Like so many others, I felt the pain of retaliatory lawsuits, including the manufactured shame that tries to break us."
In a section-by-section breakdown of the complaint, the court pointed out glaring inconsistencies, unsupported accusations, and an absence of documentary evidence to back up Baldoni's narrative. Allegations of defamation were deemed conclusory, based more on speculation than fact. The court noted that no specific statements from Lively or Reynolds were identified as false or malicious under the legal standards required to establish defamation. Claims of creative sabotage and hostile takeover of the film were likewise dismissed, as Baldoni failed to demonstrate any contractual violations or breaches of fiduciary duty that would substantiate his accusations. Furthermore, the court emphasized that Lively's internal complaint about the work environment was protected speech, filed through proper legal channels and grounded in workplace grievance protocols. That critical detail undercut Baldoni's argument that her actions were defamatory or malicious in nature. By the time the court concluded its review, what remained of Baldoni's case was a shell of its original form. The language used in the ruling was unflinching. The allegations were not only legally insufficient, they were built on narrative assumptions rather than provable facts. The court found no plausible conspiracy, no defamation under the law, and no contractual breach substantial enough to warrant further proceedings. In effect, what had been presented as a grand legal reckoning turned into a public unmasking of a lawsuit riddled with speculative storytelling.
While the suit against me was defeated, so many don't have the resources to fight back. I'm more resolved than ever to continue to stand for every woman's rights to have a voice in protecting themselves, including their safety, their integrity, their dignity, and their story.
Judge Liman's order didn't just dismiss Baldoni's accusations, it methodically dismantled the architecture of the entire case, exposing it as a legally hollow attempt to reframe a professional fallout into a courtroom drama. On the issue of extortion, a charge that, if proven, could have dramatically altered the tone and outcome of the entire case, Judge Liman's ruling was unequivocal. In the 132-page decision, the judge methodically dissected the allegations, stating that what Baldoni and Wayfarer Studios labeled as extortion bore no resemblance to what the law actually defines as such. According to the court, Baldoni's claim was fundamentally flawed because it conflated hardline negotiation tactics with criminal coercion. His team argued that Blake Lively had essentially strong-armed the studio by threatening to boycott promotional events, including the film's premiere, unless certain production grievances relating to script revisions, crew treatment, and final cut privileges were addressed to her satisfaction. But the court found that even if Lively had used her influence and leverage as the film's star to withhold promotional support, this did not constitute a threat that was wrongful in the legal sense. The judge cited settled precedent that distinguishes between unlawful extortion and high-stakes business negotiation. Simply refusing to participate in press events, particularly when framed around unresolved contractual or workplace concerns, was not tantamount to extortion. There was no evidence that Lively demanded money, nor did she make threats of illegal action. Judge Liman emphasized that none of her conduct involved violence, blackmail, or false criminal accusations. In fact, her actions fell squarely within the rights granted to her under her own contract.
There are protections out there. Check out some of the incredible organizations below for resources and information. With love and gratitude for the many who stood by me. Many of you I know, many of you I don't. But I will never stop appreciating or advocating for you.
Which did not explicitly obligate her to attend promotional appearances if she felt conditions surrounding the film's production remained unresolved or potentially damaging to her reputation. Moreover, the court made a critical point that Wayfarer failed to demonstrate any actual harm resulting from her non-participation. There was no conclusive financial loss tied directly to her absence from the premiere or press tours. No marketing deal collapsed. No distributor pulled out. And the studio, crucially, had not agreed to any of Lively's conditions in a way that impacted its operations or changed its release strategy. That absence of measurable damage rendered the extortion claim hollow. The ruling also addressed the emotional subtext of Baldoni's complaint, which implied that Lively had leveraged her celebrity to intimidate and manipulate the production process. Judge Liman's response was firm. Using one's professional standing to negotiate is not illegal. It's business. The court noted that the entertainment industry, by its nature, involves intense power dynamics, particularly between high-profile talent and production companies. But unless those dynamics involve provable threats or coercive conduct outside the bounds of lawful negotiation, they are not grounds for a criminal or civil extortion claim. In the end, the accusation not only failed, but backfired. By drawing attention to this claim, Baldoni's team inadvertently revealed how weakly grounded their entire legal theory was. What they portrayed as an orchestrated effort to shake down a film studio was reframed by the court as a standard, albeit tense, disagreement between an actor and the creative direction of a project.
Blake's attorneys, Ezra Hudson and Mike Gottlieb, also said in a statement obtained by Access, quote, "Today's opinion is a total victory and a complete vindication for Blake Lively, along with those that Justin Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties dragged into their retaliatory lawsuit, including Ryan Reynolds, Leslie Sloan, and the New York Times. As we have said from day one, this $400 million lawsuit was a sham, and the court saw right through it. We look forward to the next round, which is seeking attorneys' fees, damages, and punitive damages against Baldoni."
The drama may have been real behind the scenes. But in the courtroom, the law demanded more than narrative tension. It demanded evidence, and there simply wasn't any. The defamation charges brought by Baldoni were the next element of his lawsuit to fall apart under judicial scrutiny. And their dismissal marked a pivotal moment in the unraveling of his legal strategy. In this portion of his complaint, Baldoni alleged a vast and malicious conspiracy involving several powerful figures in the entertainment and media industries. Specifically, he accused actress Blake Lively, actor and producer Ryan Reynolds, veteran public relations executive Leslie Sloan, and the New York Times, one of the most prominent journalistic institutions in the United States, of working in concert to craft and promote a narrative that painted him as a sexual predator and portrayed his production studio as a willfully blind or even enabling entity. According to Baldoni, this alleged defamation campaign inflicted immense reputational harm and professional damage, essentially dismantling his standing in Hollywood. However, when brought before the court, these accusations failed to withstand even the initial level of legal scrutiny. The judge, in a methodical breakdown of the complaint, concluded that there was no actionable defamation under the law. First, the court turned to the statements made in the New York Times article, which formed the backbone of Baldoni's claim. It found that these statements were either direct quotations from official sources or fell within what is known in U.S. media law as the fair reporting privilege. This privilege protects journalists and media outlets when they are accurately summarizing or quoting from official proceedings, such as lawsuits or court documents, even if those statements might be damaging to a person's reputation. In this case, since much of the article was reporting on publicly filed claims or quoting sources tied to legal actions, it was deemed legally protected speech. Moreover, the court observed that several of the cited remarks were too vague, generalized, or subjective to qualify as defamatory. In defamation law, a claim cannot be based on mere opinion, ambiguous language, or emotionally charged rhetoric that lacks clear factual assertions.
Sarowitz, Nathan, and the other Wayfair parties who perpetrated this abusive litigation. Access has reached out to Baldoni's attorney for comment but did not immediately hear back. Shortly after the judge dismissed the case, Access chatted with trial attorney and legal analyst Misty Maris about the major development in the cases that happened a few days ago.
The judge noted that Baldoni's legal team attempted to interpret certain emotional expressions, indirect implications, or statements taken out of context as proof of defamation. However, U.S. courts require specific, provable falsehoods. That is, factual statements that are demonstrably untrue and capable of being verified or disproven. Mere dissatisfaction with how someone is portrayed or hurt feelings over an unflattering narrative do not constitute grounds for a defamation claim. Another significant flaw in Baldoni's case was its dependence on inference and speculation rather than clear evidence. The court pointed out that Baldoni failed to identify with precision who said what, when, and how it was false. Instead, the complaint broadly suggested that the defendants must have known the statements were false or likely coordinated behind the scenes to spread lies. Claims that were never supported with credible documentation, testimony, or corroborating facts. Courts require more than assumptions to proceed with such a serious charge, especially one targeting public figures and major media outlets. Crucially, the judge focused on the standard of actual malice, a key legal threshold in defamation cases involving public figures. Because Baldoni is a public personality, he had to prove not just that the statements were false, but that the defendants knew they were false or recklessly disregarded the truth at the time they made them. This is an intentionally high bar, designed to protect freedom of speech and robust public debate. In this case, the court found no credible indication that either Reynolds or Sloan acted with actual malice. In the case of Ryan Reynolds, the court highlighted a particularly nuanced aspect of its analysis. Reynolds had expressed anger and frustration toward Baldoni in private and public communications, which Baldoni presented as defamatory. However, the court determined that Reynolds' emotional reaction was not based on fabrication or malice, but rather stemmed from a sincere belief in the truth of the allegations, a belief informed by conversations he had with Blake Lively. Because Reynolds relied on information provided by someone he trusted, Lively, who herself had a personal and emotional stake in the matter, his reaction, while forceful, was legally protected. The judge ruled that this was a genuine emotional response.
Just a few days ago, a Daily Mail reporter came forward publicly and said that he had actually made a mistake when he used the phrase assaulted in text messages, which were later used in Justin Baldoni's lawsuit. Now, these text messages were received by the parties through a subpoena and were a central part of Baldoni's case in order to prove defamation. Well, the reporter came out and not only publicly said that Blake Lively's publicist never used those words, assaulted, but also submitted an affidavit to the court.
Not a reckless or malicious dissemination of false information. Similarly, with regard to Leslie Sloan, the court noted that public relations professionals often manage crises and respond to media inquiries, and that doing so in a way that defends their clients or presents a particular narrative does not, in itself, amount to defamation, particularly if no provably false statements are made. Again, the complaint failed to demonstrate that Sloan knowingly spread falsehoods or acted with a reckless disregard for the truth. In the final analysis, the judge concluded that the defamation claims were fatally flawed, both legally and factually. The lawsuit failed to meet even the minimum criteria required to proceed to trial. It lacked the specific, verifiable false statements necessary to constitute defamation. It failed to establish malicious intent or reckless indifference to the truth, and it attempted to stretch the boundaries of legal doctrine to cover what was, at its core, a public backlash and interpersonal fallout, not a coordinated smear campaign backed by provably false narratives. As such, the court dismissed the defamation portion of Baldoni's case in its entirety, leaving that avenue of redress closed to him.